Beneath skies that never seemed to end, under glaciers that crept and shifted like living things, a people walked who are now only shadows in our blood. They weren't monsters, nor half-formed myths. They were human, close enough to us that if one stood before you today, you'd see a familiar face. Different, yes, but still recognizably kin. These were the Neanderthals, hunters and storytellers who raised children around fires in the Ice Age valleys of Europe and Western Asia. For over 300,000 years, they endured winters that would freeze rivers solid and winds that stripped the land bare. And then, in what prehistory would count as the blink of an eye, they were gone. No grand war, no sudden apocalypse, just a long silence where their voices once had been. The mystery of why still lingers like smoke in the cave air they once breathed. For decades, explanations circled like competing hunters. Climate, competition, plagues, bad luck. Each theory had its champions, none the full truth. But the bones they left behind, tucked in sediment and rock, kept more than dust. They carried secrets written in molecules, in fragile strands of ancient DNA. And when researchers learned how to read them, a new story surfaced. Not one of dramatic conquest, but of numbers, of populations too small to carry their world forward. In cave sites from the Altai Mountains to the limestone hollows of Croatia and Belgium, the genomes whispered the same refrain. Long stretches of identical DNA appeared again and again, signals of kin, marrying kin, of bands so thinly spread that the circle of possible partners narrowed to family. This wasn't just chance, it was survival under strain, repeated over generations until it became written into their chromosomes. The pattern stretched across continents. Where once the Neanderthal line had branched wide, the tree was folding inward. They weren't expanding, they were contracting, thinning into scattered groups tucked into valleys and caves. And here is the cruel mathematics of life. When your numbers dwindle, fragility takes root. A harsh winter, a poor hunt, a sickness that sweeps through a camp. Events survivable for thousands can cripple a band of a few dozen. Genes that should have been balanced by diversity instead circled endlessly in small pools. Mutations accumulated. Vital variation bled away. In the bones, this fragility left tracks. Y chromosomes so uniform, they looked like echoes of a single voice. Mitochondrial lineages bottlenecked into narrow streams. Even the sites themselves, ash-filled hearths, clusters of tools, tell of smaller groups, thinner communities. And while they struggled, something else moved across their landscapes. From Africa, waves of modern humans pressed outward, following rivers and coasts, carrying wider networks, broader exchanges, and the ability to share knowledge over distances unimaginable to their cousins. The encounters were not always violent. In fact, the proof of their meetings is inside us. Most people alive today, outside of Africa, carry a fragment of Neanderthal DNA, 1 to 2%, shaping our skin, our immune systems, even how we respond to sunlight. These traces remind us that contact wasn't only conflict, but the exchange was lopsided. While Neanderthal genes entered our lineage, our genes rarely flowed back to them after those first encounters. Their shrinking populations, already fractured, never received the influx of new diversity that might have steadied them. Instead, they remained isolated, small fires glowing faintly, while larger networks flared all around them. When the ice returned and prey shifted across the plains, when winters grew harsher and herds moved beyond reach, each blow fell heavier on these scattered groups. And still, They held on, lighting their hearths, raising their children, shaping tools from stone. The story wasn't of weakness. It was of endurance stretched too thin, of survival carried as far as it could go. Their fate wasn't sealed by a single disaster. It was sealed by the arithmetic of being too few for too long. And that is where the first half of this story pauses, not in an ending, but in a slow tightening of circles. They were not yet gone. They still hunted in forests, still laughed around fires, still passed down memories through the voices of elders. But in their very DNA, the clock was already ticking. If you're drawn into these hidden chapters of human history, stay with me as we uncover what pushed the Neanderthals from decline into disappearance. And before we continue, don't forget, drop a comment below with your thoughts on what you think mattered most in their fall. And if you're new here, subscribe to Prehistoric Medievals, where we bring the deep past back into the present. The story doesn't restart here. It simply keeps moving, like the slow turning of a glacier. By 60,000 years ago, Neanderthals were already living in pockets, their world stitched into fragments. Camps of a few families here, a cave of cousins there. And then, into these scattered lives, modern humans kept pressing forward, wave after wave, moving along coasts and valleys, carrying with them more than stone tools. They brought songs and stories that traveled across entire regions, alliances that stretched beyond one valley, and a population base so large that even setbacks could be absorbed. When they met Neanderthals, sometimes they shared more than fires, sometimes even children. We know this because inside ancient bones, the signatures are clear. A girl born of a Neanderthal mother and a Denisovan father, or the faint strands of modern human DNA replacing old Neanderthal lineages in Europe. These moments of connection were real, but they were not enough. The trickle of fresh genes that could have widened Neanderthal diversity slowed to almost nothing. They stayed small, stayed vulnerable, while the newcomers multiplied. In the DNA, the evidence reads like a ledger. Long runs of sameness across chromosomes. Effective population sizes measured not in millions, not in hundreds of thousands, but in the low thousands, and sometimes lower still. A single harsh winter could be a catastrophe. A poor hunt could echo for years. Even in the caves, archaeologists find patterns that mirror the biology. Clusters of close relatives buried together, men remaining in the group while women moved between bands, tight circles that tightened further with each generation. These weren't just people living. They were people holding on, always just a step away from numbers too low to sustain. But fragility alone doesn't make a disappearance. What tipped them from endurance into extinction was the stacking of pressures. Climate snapped back and forth, shifting prey ranges by dozens of miles. New diseases may have arrived with modern humans, and in small groups, sickness spreads fast and kills harder. And then there was competition. Not always war, but enough overlap in hunting grounds and shelters that every missed deer, every lost cave, cut sharper. Each factor alone might have been survivable. Together, they tilted the balance. In the end, it wasn't that Neanderthals were less intelligent, or incapable, or doomed by nature. It was that demography, those merciless numbers, offers little forgiveness. Still, even in decline, their presence never vanished entirely. The last Neanderthals lingered in peninsulas and refuges, isolated camps where fires still burned, where children were still born. But the arithmetic was cruel. Births could not keep pace with losses. One camp failed, then another. By about 40,000 years ago, the line was gone, except for the faint fragments they left inside us. And those fragments matter. They are the proof that Neanderthals were not shadows, but kin. That their story didn't vanish into silence but continues in our very cells. They lived through hardships few of us can imagine, yet endured for hundreds of thousands of years. Their end was not a single tragic event, but the slow mathematics of being too few, for too long, in a world that was changing faster than their numbers could recover. It leaves us with a kind of humility. Because what ancient DNA reveals isn't a tale of monsters or failures. It's the reminder of how thin the line can be between survival and silence. A broken spear, a vanished herd, a storm too long. When there are only a few voices around a fire, such events can echo into forever. And yet, in our genomes, their voices are still here, faint but enduring, like embers that never went out. So when we think of the Neanderthals, don't picture a doomed species stumbling toward extinction. Picture families under winter skies. Picture smoke rising from caves. Picture people who carried their world as far as it could go. Their story is not one of weakness. It's one of endurance, of resilience, and of how human stories can end, not with a bang, but with a whisper. If this journey into their final chapters sparked something in you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you think weighed heaviest in their fall? Leave a comment below, and don't forget to subscribe to Prehistoric Medievals, where we keep exploring the forgotten lives that shaped our shared past.